Hi, Jamie Cowen here to talk with you today about keeping your faith during this time of insanity. I started this vlog before the craziness at the U.S. Capitol. Watching those tragic events unfold was very emotional for me because I grew up around the Congress. I love the institution, and my memories of going there as a child and later working there are all positive ones. While many view politicians with skepticism and cynicism, I've known many who were towering public servants. What makes what happened even more disillusioning, though, is the fact that many of those so-called stormtroopers were so-called followers of Jesus. Some of them I even know. I've spoken numerous times about how politicization of the gospel is discrediting the gospel message. But I've neglected to address a related issue which affects me personally, that being the impact of blind support for Trump upon many disillusioned believers, especially younger ones. When I was in seminary, I wrote a paper on George Mueller, an amazing man of God who cared for thousands of orphans in England during the 19th century. What I didn't know until recently, when I read another story about Mueller, is that the orphan problem in England was exacerbated by a pandemic in the 1830s where multitudes of parents suddenly died, leaving their children to fend for themselves. Following the biblical mandate that says religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, Mueller took up the challenge and ultimately opened orphanages that ministered to 1/3 of the orphans in England. Contrast that to today's pandemic, where the focus is on supporting an out-of-control president, propagating conspiracy theories, and undermining efforts to vaccinate the population by claiming the vaccines are embedded with chips facilitated by George Soros, Bill Gates, or some unnamed globalist. For years, I've taught Jewish history around the world. The most troubling part of Jewish history is how Christianity became openly anti-Semitic, leading to the deaths of millions of Jews. This part of the course deeply troubled most of my students. How could followers of Yeshua do such things? It's a good question, for which I didn't and don't have a good answer. Some try to answer this question by suggesting that some such people were not true Christians. So how will future generations look upon this period? Will they say the same things about the people following a megalomaniac? I have to be honest. I've personally struggled during this period. Spiritual leaders who I've admired and known seem blinded by what's obvious to so many. That is the blatant hypocrisy of supporting an incorrigibly corrupt person because he supports certain policies that the religious leaders hold important. As I said in an early video, it's a Faustian bargain. I know many believers who are disillusioned, who feel isolated, who've lost friends and even family members, who no longer feel comfortable or even welcome in their spiritual communities, who wonder if there's something wrong with themselves, and who find themselves feeling distant from the Lord. It's understandable. Part of our identity is wrapped up in the communities of which we are a part. When those communities disappoint, we feel lost. We feel betrayed. It's a difficult place to be in. So how do we handle it? And how do we keep our faith in the midst of insanity? Well, number one, as the Apostle Paul said, let God be true and every man a liar. Despite what others do, even those who call on his name, God is still God. Paul says later, we received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Don't doubt yourself. If you experienced the reality of God by accepting Yeshua as Messiah and seek to walk with him, you know him. You know what's true and what's not. The famous slogan from the 1990s is helpful. Remember? WWJD? What would Jesus do? We certainly know what he did in responding to political issues. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. Just because some who are Trump diehards are respected religious leaders and friends, remember the words of Yeshua. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? And then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evil doers. Could all these leaders be wrong? Of course. Anyone can be wrong. The religious leaders of Yeshua's day rejected him. Why can't that happen again? Number 2. Recall the deeds of the Lord. The psalmist says, I will not die, but I will live to recount the deeds of the Lord. As I shared in an earlier video, human crises, tragedies, and devastations have been a common historic experience. Until the recent pandemic, our generations were the first to mostly avoid these. The Bible includes many instances of tragedy. Now we're faced with them, and on top of that, many respected spiritual leaders have gone loco. But none of this changes our own experience. I still remember the first meeting where I heard about Jesus over 50 years ago. There was something supernatural about it. I remember much later how God spoke to me about the person that I would marry, about the profession that I would enter, about joining the ministry, about moving to Israel. Each step of the way, he was there. He made himself known to me. No one can take these experiences from me. As Job said, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I will see him with my own eyes and not another. As bad as things get, I know that my Redeemer lives. Number 3, dealing with friends and family. This is the tragedy of our era. Relationships have suffered over ridiculous political antics. Still, the Bible says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Try and not sever relationships. Look, my parents severed their relationships with me for 28 years because of my faith in Yeshua. It was painful, and it not only affected me, but also my children. Thankfully, my relationship with them was restored shortly before they died. Severing relationships are rarely, if ever, beneficial. Certain boundaries may need to be erected to keep everyone sane, but try to avoid burning bridges. You can always reach agreements as to what are acceptable topics of discussion and what are not. Number 4, is your spiritual community the right one for you? Spiritual communities are supposed to be safe places. We come to meet God and hopefully build strong bonds with other communal members. Godly behavior and communication should be accepted norms. The most important component of a spiritual community is its leadership. Do the leaders exhibit a godly life in behavior and speech? Do they encourage personal growth among members? Are they available during personal crises? Do they provide guidelines for godly living? If yes, then this is probably a healthy community. On the other hand, do they seek to dictate to others God's will about numerous matters? Is everyone expected to share the the same political views? Is intolerance shown to those who differ with leadership? Is there an expectation to conform or leave? If yes, then this is probably an unhealthy community. Look, no community is perfect, and leaders aren't perfect. I should know, having been an imperfect congregational leader for 22 years. But I hope I grew in my role over the years. During times such as these, good leaders should be encouraging their congregations to serve their larger communities, to sacrifice for others, to abide by public health guidelines, to love the other, to listen to those who have different views, and to remain free of politics. If you're feeling uncomfortable with the direction and atmosphere of your congregation, you should first address your concerns to the congregational leadership. If they acknowledge the legitimacy of your views and agree to address them, great. If not, then you must consider whether it remains the right community for you. What you must avoid is creating division in the congregation or seeking to undermine the leadership. It's better to simply look elsewhere for another community. I guarantee you, you will not be alone. Remember the prophet Elijah, who thought he was alone when God said to him, "There are 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to Baal." I'll conclude with these words. Keep the faith. Don't give up. And remember that he who began a good work in you will complete it in the day of Jesus the Messiah. Thank you, and see you next time.